basis for future mandates for peacekeeping. You know that from the ravages of armed conflict and natural disasters. His MDG goals was a dramatic change in international affairs, placing, as we've heard, poverty at the top of the international agenda, rather than interstate disputes. The MDGs, together with the Global Fund to fight HIV/AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria, were successes in international cooperation and were for the benefit of developing countries. His initiative in developing the doctrine of the responsibility to protect. He felt that was part of sovereignty. What kind of sovereign government are you if you do not assume responsibility to protect the people in your territory? I can't tell you how that principle has and still is opposed by many governments, but he championed that. And together with him, we called for a broader concept of what is in the national interest, that what is in the collective interest is also in the national interest. I was so pleased that he came to The Hague for the inauguration of the International Criminal Court because it offered hope to victims of the most heinous crimes. And this he did, even though the court was and still is not supported by important states, including 3 of the P5 countries. So here's a principled position that he took. As an insider, I can testify to the enormous effort and persistence needed to reach these many agreements and treaties that he did. It literally entailed the shedding of blood and tears over every agonizing word in those documents. Let me tell you the 2 important words that were not allowed in the Millennium Development Goals: human rights. So that ought to tell you how difficult these agreements are, but he led that process. I would say credit goes largely to Annan for his leadership, but you know what? He generously credits his staff, and let me quote him. Many of these achievements are due to the courageous and resourceful staff of the organization who dedicate themselves to humanitarian principles and who work tirelessly in the most dangerous and desperate places on earth where they are needed most. So true to character, he passes the credit to those who've done the work. His most famously quoted remark best describes the man and his work. He said, "Healthy and sustainable societies are based on 3 pillars: peace and security, sustainable development and the rule of law, and respect for human rights. There can be no long-term security without development. There can be no long-term development without security, and no society can long remain prosperous without the rule of law and respect for human rights." So these are very, very often quoted. On August 15th, just 3 days before his demise, Kofi Annan launched his Road to Peace 2017 by issuing his foundation's annual report that he had been working on for some time. Now, the true optimist that he was, he concludes with hope for the future. And he says that global crises can be resolved because we now have the tools and the experience. However, what we need, he said, is far-sighted leadership and political will. So until the end, he was a man for the people and a man of the people, a man of...
Thank you very much, Judge Pillay, for those insights as well. The person I mentioned earlier, Hannah Yilma, in her last interview said, retirement is a comma, not a full stop. And I think you live
development for my people and my community. I stand because I am the ambassador of the Sustainable Development Goals, of which I was introduced to the Millennium Development Goals by you. Okodwa kufa uyinuku uthatha amagugu ethu usishiye sikhala sodwa. Kodwa ke baba, you ran your race ngoba uze wathweswa uphapho lwegwalagwala kulesi sikhungo semfundo esikuyona namhlanje. Oh hey, kohamba izinsizwa kosalwa izibongo. Ulale ngoxolo baba. May your soul rest in peace. Busumuru yedase.
Thank you very much to the United Nations Choir for that beautiful rendition of Senzeni now. Our next speaker is Selo Hatang, the Chief Executive of the Nelson Mandela Foundation. And it's fitting that in your poem you talked about the elders, and that's what Selo Hatang is going to speak about, the indispensable role that Kofi Annan played in this remarkable group of individuals.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much particularly to the newly formed UN choir. You know, Ambassador Nhlapho, they were saying, I wonder how new is new. Because knowing the UN, it might be that with their history, it's a 100-year-old choir, but they're just modest. Thank you very much again for this opportunity. Minister Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, the Vice Chancellor, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I'm honored today to say a few words about Ntate Kofi Annan on behalf of the trustees and staff of the Nelson Mandela Foundation. We're devastated to hear of his passing. Having hosted him just a few weeks ago and experienced again his winning combination of dry humor and graciousness. So I went to him, Minister, and I said to him, well, you know, Ntate Annan, you must be relieved that you, in your time, you at least could get a letter on foreign policy by a particular country, or that a country is about to declare war on another country, and these days it's done through Twitter. So, in true style of Ntate Annan, he just looked at me and he smiled and he said, yeah. Now, I wonder wherever he is now, he must be looking down and saying, Hatang, together with Madiba, Mrs. Graça Machel, and Archbishop Tutu. Just recently, as I'm sure everyone here will remember, he was our honored guest at the 16th Nelson Mandela Annual Lecture delivered by President Barack Obama. Ntate Annan was our friend. We will miss him. Our condolences go out to all who knew him well, especially his wife, Nane, and their children, Ama, Kojo, and Nina. Our thoughts have been with you throughout this week. We want to say your loss is not just yours, but ours too. I must, of course, say a few words about the close relationship that Ntate Annan enjoyed over the years with Madiba. In the foreword, he wrote to Madiba's book, Mandela, the authorized portrait, Ntate Annan wrote, I quote, throughout the years of our friendship, Nelson Mandela has been a source of support and inspiration to me, both personally and as Secretary General. And in the same text, he recalled a speech Madiba gave to the UN General Assembly in 1998, and I quote, we had been chatting in a private room beforehand, and as ever, he was making everyone around him feel completely relaxed, and through his unique mix of humor, warmth, informality, and dignity. Close quote. Speaking of Mtate Annan in 2002, Madiba called him a courageous leader. He says your vision and ability to link the well-being of children and the security of international community is a source of inspiration. Privately, Madiba called him boss, a teasing reference to his decade-long tenure as Secretary General of the United Nations and supposed authority over heads of state. The two leaders got to know each other in mutual respect as they worked together on numerous projects and interventions. They shared a grief and a sense of not having done enough to prevent the Rwandan genocide. They worked closely together on the Burundi peace process. They shared a passion for combating the scourge of HIV/AIDS globally, but especially in Africa. I could go on and on. Kofi Annan was a great leader, a special human being. Like Madiba, he made mistakes. Like all bosses, frequently he found that he couldn't transcend the limitations of the organization he headed. Systems which were resilient to change, but took personal responsibility for those mistakes. But he never stopped trying. He never stopped working. He never stopped walking, even when his feet wanted to collapse and give in under him. And he never stopped believing in the world of his dreams. We have no doubt that his legacy will long survive him. In his honor, let's build Zimbabwe. Let's build Burundi. Let's build every corner of this continent that cares about the vulnerable, the forgotten, the discarded. May no child ever know that they have no place because he wanted to create that space and that place for the child. I want to say to you, Mtate Kofi Annan, as you get to the other side and you meet the ancestor of hope, active citizenship, as the same bishop called Mdgs Mandela, may you tell them that we will continue to fight the battle and defend your dream of an Africa that cares about its most vulnerable. We want to say to you, we know that you will be accompanied by two accomplished women. One, Aretha Franklin, who will do what this choir was doing just now. And on the other side, you will be accompanied by Me Sobukwe. You will have and you will meet people like Ahmed Kathrada, whose birthday we were celebrating just recently. And we know that you will tell them that a country of their dreams will be built, and that you tried your best to be a bridge-building ancestor. Robala ka kagiso, ntwa o e lwele. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Selo, and thank you for the amazing work the Foundation's doing as a key partner of the United Nations in South Africa. Our next speaker is the ambassador of Ghana. And as much as South Africa claimed him, claimed Kofi Annan, and Africa did, and the world did, I think Ghanaians may have put us a little bit to being the most proud of Kofi Annan. So if I could please ask the High Commissioner, I ought to know this, of Ghana, Mr. George Aisi Boateng, to say a few words, and he will be accompanied by Patrick Poby, who will play a flute alongside a few words. So thank you very much.
Can you please rise up? Can you please? As our tradition. fact, saying goodbye to a family man, such a personality, I called him Uncle Kofi. It's not easy for me, but I'll try. Your Excellencies, Honorable Minister, Your Highness Judge, Prof. VC, and my dear UN Resident Coordinator, all other protocols observed. It's with heaviness of a heart I make these remarks on behalf of the President of the Republic of Ghana, His Excellency Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, and the good people of the Republic of Ghana, at this memorial service in honor of my own uncle, Kofi Annan. When I got invitation from the office of the Resident Coordinator of the United Nations in Pretoria to deliver this tribute on Kofi Annan, Secretary General of the United Nations from 1997 to 2006, given the rather limited time at my disposal, I said to myself, I cannot delay. I have only 48 hours to deliver. Let me put down some ideas. And indeed, as I sat down listening to the speaker after speaker, the steam has been taken out of me. Because virtually what I have to say about my uncle has been said by them all. And they are true stories, but I'll manage. So what I'm going to tell you about Kofi Annan today is just some synopsis on the legacies that public leaders often tend to leave society during their terms of office. Kofi in Akan parlance, Ghanaian Akan parlance, means someone who was born on a Friday. And I wonder why you chose today, Friday, for this memorial service. He was born on Friday. That's why it was called Kofi. And Ata, in between that name Ata too, means he was born a twin. So Kofi has some peculiar historical antecedents in his name itself. And in Akan, in Akan, we have an axiom which says that every name has its own peculiarities, and that is Kofi Annan for you. Let's me remind you that Kofi Annan he joined the UN in 1962. And one cannot do justice to this international icon by just looking at his accomplishment over this 56-year period. So when I got here this morning, I was telling the resident coordinator, he said, "You give me 10 minutes to speak about Kofi Annan." I beg to differ. He has a tall list of achievements that if I should eulogize on Kofi, it should be a whole day or more. But I'll try to limit myself to the time given to me and make do the subject about Kofi Annan. Kofi was born, the records show that he was born in 1938 in Kumasi. Kumasi is the second capital city of Ghana, those who don't know Ghana. And it is the administrative capital of the Ashanti Kingdom. And that is where I live. He had his secondary education in Cape Coast at Mfantsipim School. His tertiary education program background goes as follows. In 1958, he entered the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology in Kumasi, Ghana. He registered to do undergraduate in Bachelor of Science with economics as his option. Luckily for him, or in between, he had a grant from Ford Foundation, and he had to leave Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology and continued in St. Paul, in Macalester College in St. Paul, Minnesota, USA, and completed in 1961. In 1962, he was awarded a diploma in international relations at the Graduate Institute of International and Development Studies in Geneva, Switzerland. Then in 1972, he did his master's degree in management at MIT Sloan School of Management. Mr. Annan was fluent in English. I know you all know. Fluent in French. And of course, very fluent in our Akan dialect and some of the African languages as well. The man was blessed with brain, knowledge, wisdom that one cannot imagine. But from his name, Kofi Annan, that is how you saw him as he is. As Secretary General of the UN, body that has over 193 member countries, you need a strong heart to steer its affairs. So no doubt the work that he did was very enormous, overseeing the activities of 17 organs and other specialized agencies with special people of the UN in order to achieve the above mandates of this enormous task. Then you need a man, a personality of one sort. Some of these organs include the ILO, the FAO, the UNESCO, the UNIDO, and WHO, where he started as a budget officer in 1962 and traveled all the way down the lane to become, before he ascended the throne of the Secretary General of the United Nations in the year 1997. Is it? I'm subject to be corrected anyway. Am I right? I hope I'm correct. Yes, from 1997, he launched his initiative for reforming the UN, which included the introduction of strategic management to strengthen unity of purpose, reductions in UN administrative costs, and reaching out to civil society and the business sector, playing more active roles in human rights issues, conflict prevention, peacekeeping, and peace building. In 1999, in an address to the World Economic Forum, Kofi Annan argued that the goals of the UN and those of the business sector can be mutually supportive, and proposed that both initiate a global compact of shared values and business social responsibility principles under what he termed the United Nations Global Compact. In 2000, he launched it at the UN headquarters in New York. Mr. Kofi Annan played important roles on the following. 1, the 2003 US-led invasion of Iraq. Annan supported the efforts by East Timor to secure independence from Indonesia. Iran's nuclear program, Iranian Holocaust Denial Conference in 2006, UN Peacekeeping Force for Darfur. He was responsible for certifying Israel's withdrawal from the Lebanon. Annan led talks in New York, which led to a settlement of the dispute between Cameroon and Nigeria over the Bakazi Peninsula, Annan also worked with several Arab countries and groups on women's rights. In 2000, Kofi Annan launched the Millennium Development Goals. The Nobel Committee decided that the Peace Prize was to be divided between the UN and Kofi Annan in 2001. So they were both awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for their work for a better organized and more peaceful world. The oil for food issue. As we might recollect, in December 2004, reports surfaced that Kofi Annan's son, Kojo Annan, had collected money from a Swiss company which had won, I told you. I told you that as a Ghanaian, and my icon, my uncle, my mentor, well, I'll make time. Yes, in 2004, there was an issue involving Uncle Kofi's son.
This technology is creating headaches. Guided by the Charter of the United Nations Organization, our first and lasting impression was of a selfless African committed to peace in the continent and his profound understanding of the United Nations system. He was versatile and embraced innovation in handling matters relating to peaceful resolution of conflicts. In a rare collaboration with Nelson Mandela and with the cooperation of the Libyan government, they devised the option to resolve the Lockerbie issue between the United States, France, the United Kingdom, and Libya. The impasse had already led to US strikes against Muammar Gaddafi in Tripoli, in which some members of his family were killed. Kofi Annan personally escorted the named suspects to The Hague to stand trial, a first for a United Nations Secretary General. It displayed the same commitment and flexibility in providing guidance to our government when faced with a request to provide security for part of the Hutu leadership which would not return to their king. Is advised to engage private security companies to provide the protection. This was due to our experience of the activities of South African private security companies in fending conflicts on the continent whenever their services were sought. We're in the process of passing a law against any foreign military assistance. It gave us the basis to deploy our military elements to provide such security as provided by Burundi. This we did with the full knowledge that this was not their function. This was again another first. That deployment was to serve as a nucleus of the African Union mission in Burundi, which was later reheaded as the United Nations peacekeeping mission to Burundi, another first of its kind. When the African mission in Darfur was faced with a funding challenge, it devised a solution through advancing for a hybrid mission which was jointly managed by the African Union and the United Nations. Despite skepticism to the initiative, it was indeed a creative solution to the unique challenge facing the international community in discharging its responsibility to protect civilians in Darfur. Its shortcomings notwithstanding, that experience provides a lesson to the United Nations in the common management of conflicts in cooperation with regional organizations under Chapter 8 of the Charter. I deliberately mention these three experiences to illustrate that given the political will to act and principled leadership, as Nelson Mandela said, nothing is impossible until it is done. Kofi Annan did a lot of things in the service of the United Nations and humanity. He did that in Myanmar, where nobody thought that there was any possibility for unlocking the closed political space that was due to the military rule. And this resulted in bringing the country firmly to the path of civilian rule. There is so much in the area of conflict prevention, peace building, sustainable development that has his fingerprints all over them. He made the UN a truly organization of the people by opening space to civil society participation in the affairs of the United Nations. We can only hope that the reforms introduced by the current Secretary General will build on the foundations laid by Kofi Annan. We salute him for his humility and modesty and for the manner in which he cared about the challenges facing the staff. He assisted them whenever it was necessary and would occasionally join them in the canteen queues to have his meals there, sometimes without his security detail. I want to end by thanking him for affording me the opportunity to serve as a peacekeeper and political manager, both in the field in Burundi and at the headquarters in New York. I owe my growth as a rounded diplomat also
Commissioner for Human Rights, Judge Pillay. I see Honorable former Finance Minister of South Africa, also the longest serving Finance Minister of the Republic, Honorable Trevor Manuel. Your Excellency, President Coordinator of and the organizer of this very solemn, dignified event, and indeed Honorable Professor Makaya, our very hospitable host this morning, Your Excellency Ambassador IEC Boateng of the Fraternal Pioneer Republic of Ghana, Honorable CEO of the Nelson Mandela Foundation, Mr. Hatang, my dear brother, and of course, one of the most distinguished diplomats South Africa ever produced since 1994, my mentor, Ambassador Nhlapo. Your Excellencies, distinguished members of the Diplomatic Corps, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to convey the apologies of the Honorable Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, Ms. Lindiwe Sisulu, who could not be here with us due to prior commitments. On behalf of the Department of International Relations and Cooperation, I wish to express our most profound condolences on the sad passing of the former Secretary General of the United Nations, Busumuri, Dr. Kofi Annan of the Fraternal Republic of Ghana. We thank the resident coordinator in the United Nations office for convening this memorial service in his honor. This morning we pay tribute to a great son of our continent who rose to assume the highest office in global diplomacy. Program Director Upon hearing of the sad news of the passing on of Kofi Annan, His Excellency, the President of the Republic, President Cyril Ramaphosa, noted that the former UNSG, Dr. Annan, was a consummate diplomat who lived a life in service to humanity. The President stated that Kofi Annan became a symbol of African excellence and the contribution that Africans are making towards peace, development, and human rights throughout the world. Through his tireless efforts, he was instrumental in strengthening and promoting the multilateral system of global governance in the quest to ensure that the right of humanity is secured as envisaged by the Charter of the United Nations Organization. Kofi Annan led the UN through difficult times, navigating the big power politics that continue to paralyze the organization. Throughout, he was an arch proponent of collective action to address the multitude of global challenges that we face. His term at the helm of the UN reaffirmed the moral authority of the organization and its role in setting the principles that should guide humanity. The achievement that must stand out amongst numerous during his tenure as Secretary General was the adoption of the Millennium Declaration in the year 2000 by the largest gathering of world leaders ever at the UN in New York. This declaration recognized that the benefits of globalization should accrue to all people of the world, and that clear commitments should be made to ensure that basic development goals are achieved. The Millennium Development Goals, otherwise popularly known as the Mdgs, developed by the UN Secretariat led by Dr. Annan, were instrumental in refocusing aid and ensuring that health, poverty, education, were at the center of the global agenda. The enduring legacy of the Mdgs is that today they have evolved in what is now referred to as the Sustainable Development Goals, or the SDGs, which address the triple challenges of poverty, inequality, and unemployment that many countries, including our own, face. Kofi Annan was also instrumental in entrenching the principle of responsibility to protect, otherwise known as R2P, which basically underscored the need to move away from the old doctrine of non-interference to non-indifference in the context of genocide and crimes against humanity. Indeed, he will be remembered for his role in strengthening the role of the UN, particularly in peacekeeping missions, after a number of failures and tragedies associated with non-intervention. Program Director, in 2005, Dr. Annan issued his landmark report entitled "In Larger Freedom Towards Development, Security, and Human Rights for All." In this report, Dr. Annan highlighted the interdependence of peace, security on the one hand, development and human rights on the other. He noted that in an area of global interdependence, the glue of common interests, if properly perceived, should bind all states together in this cause, as should the impulses of our common humanity. This was indeed a reaffirmation that for us to succeed, we need to work collectively, and that no nation can work in isolation to deal with the multitude of challenges we face. These words ring truer today than ever before, as multilateralism is under severe threat by rising nationalist sentiments and growing unilateralism. Indeed, we see the ugly face of geopolitics and the demon of geopolitics rising again. This necessitates us to entrench the centrality of collective action as espoused by Kofi Annan, and to strengthening institutions of global governance, such as the UN, to deal with the contemporary challenges such as climate change, migration, indeed global trade, as we see increased measures that are taken, which are leading to what many characterize now as a trade war, and also to address the peace, security, and development challenges that the world faces. Program Director, we feel extremely privileged that South Africa was the first UN member state that Kofi Annan visited soon after his election as the Secretary General of the UN. Kofi Annan was awarded South Africa's highest national order for foreign nationals, the Order of the Companion of O.R. Tambo in 2004, for his role in the struggle against colonialism worldwide.
The UN choir does take requests and dedications clearly, so we're very proud of you. Thank you. Our keynote speaker, and I would have said, Minister, that you need no introduction, but after the Kofi Annan story, I will give an introduction. Our Minister in the Presidency, Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, former Chairperson of the African Union, former Minister of Foreign Affairs, Minister of Health, and somebody who has really believed and lived multilateralism. So we're very honored to have you address us this morning, Minister.
Thank you very much, Program Director. Our gracious host, Professor Makane, the Resident Coordinator of the United Nations, our sister. I've got many sisters today. Our sister Phumzile Mlambo Ngcuka, the UN Women Executive Director, my bigger sister, Navi, the judge, and former UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, His Excellency the High Commissioner, Ghana, George Aise Boateng. Ghana is spreading. We had another ambassador here, High Commissioner Boateng, but from the United Kingdom. The Excellencies, the ambassadors, Ambassador Welile Nhlapo, he also taught me a lot when I got to Foreign Affairs. And Ambassador Nkosi, Excellencies, ambassadors, members of the diplomatic corps, my brother there, how can I forget you? My brother Trevor, and the CEO of the Nelson Mandela Foundation, and all the fellow mourners. Indeed, the news of the departure of our greatest son of the soil and the diplomat par excellence, reached us with disbelief as he had taken his last breath. We'd like to dip our national and our continental banner in his honor as we extend condolences to his wife, Nane, Maria Annan, and the children, Kojo, Nina, and Ama, as well as the Ghanaian family and the rest of the world to which he belonged. Like many great people, they are born in small families, but they die with huge families, and his family was the entire world. Of course, we also know that he's accompanied by Umamu Veronica Zobube and Aretha. But we want to say to them, their loss is our loss. But we also thank the Ghanaians and his family for sharing him with us and sharing him with the world. His contribution for development, for peace, his fight against poverty, inequality, will remain embedded in ours and future generations' memories. We lose this gentle and level-headed soul at a time when the nations of the world most require his guidance in securing global harmony as well as peace, security, and development. From the humble beginnings in Kumasi, Kofi understood the contradictions confronting many an African, with an abundance of mineral resources on one hand and some poverty on the other. Annan knew, as we have proven from time to time again, that education was one of the most important weapons by which the colonial master could be defeated and underdevelopment could be conquered. In his own words, I quote, "Knowledge is power. Information is liberating. Education is the premise of progress in every society, in every family," close quote. And of course, he understood that from his early life, and that's why he pursued education himself. And he did it at the time when many Africans could not dare dream beyond being a drawer of water and a gatherer of food. It was an unstable world that knew no peace, in which the native sons and daughters had been dispossessed of their land, livestock, and livelihoods. Yet, despite all these limitations, Annan rose through the ranks of the United Nations, starting with the WHO organization in 1962, eventually becoming the Undersecretary of Peacekeeping before reaching the apex of the United Nations, the Secretary General. Having served in these various capacities and focal areas in the UN system, in his words, he understood very well that, I quote, "We will not enjoy security without development. We will not enjoy development without security. And we will not enjoy either without respect for human rights," close quotes. In pursuing the goal of security in the world, Kofi Annan played an instrumental role in resolving many conflicts. And Ambassador Lapo here spoke about Burundi and went to find new ways of meeting the realities that we were facing, that were not foreseen by the UN at the time it was established. But he also spent lots of time discussing Darfur, how we had to handle Darfur. He spent long hours at the AU at the time. I was foreign minister then, discussing how to handle Darfur, both in terms of who should go there, but also how it should be funded. And of course, he also understood that in moments of crisis, the wise men build bridges, not dams, as the Nigerian proverb says. He was a builder of bridges. One of his accomplishments, as has been said, is the bridge he built between not only the nations of the world, the private sector, and civil society, in the pursuance of common objectives and goals as captured by the Millennium Development Goals, Mdgs for short, which were the solid foundation that the Sustainable Development Goals are built on. Through the Mdgs, inspired and activated global corporate citizens to act for the common good through adhering to the 10 principles of the UN Global Compact. 18 years or more than 9,000 of the world's leading private sector executives are part of the Global Compact, and they've signed up towards action to secure human rights, fair labor practice, environmental sustainability, and the fight against corruption. Kofi Annan understood too well that such commitments and the objectives for a better world, and we hope we will have another one before our sister leaves the UN. And of course, Kofi Annan fearlessly led from the front, ensuring that even the most difficult issues were addressed by the United Nations. He encouraged us, guided us through a very difficult conference here in South Africa in Durban, the World Conference Against Racism, Racial Discrimination, Xenophobia, and Related Intolerance. And that conference, for the first time, made the world to accept and acknowledge that slavery was a crime against humanity. And of course, we worked with him also for the Johannesburg. You could speak to him without fearing that you are speaking to this great giant of the world. But he also guided you and gave you advice. And one advice that I will initiate, because it will try to negotiate the text until it's meaningless. And at that point, they will say, we can't support this, it's meaningless. So that has stayed with me in negotiations. I know where to stop and say, if we go beyond this, then this text will be meaningless. And so we remain very indebted to him. But also his humility. I think humility, of course, is a trait of great people, and he was one of those. But even in his retirement, he remained available, not only to us in Africa, but to the rest of the world. And he was there in times of need and gave us wise counsel. As my sister said, that the aftermath of the Kenyan elections, he was there and willing to mediate. And I had the honor to receive the final report from him when I was at the AU. And of course, one of the things that nobody has mentioned about Kofi's passions was agriculture. he was very keen that Africa must be able to feed itself, and that Africa must be able to feed itself and contribute to feeding the world. When we were at the AU, he came, retired from the UN, to participate in a conference about agriculture in Africa. He was also, as I said earlier, very passionate in education. When we had the summit on higher education in Senegal, he came not to give a keynote speech, but to actually participate and give ideas and debate. And this, we forever remember him for. And of course, like my brother, I was told I have 10 minutes, so I must try and respect that time. We must say that indeed Africa has lost one of its big baobab trees. How do we console the family and ourselves? What words can we offer to the weeping nation and continent? I think we should all take comfort that Mr. Kofi Annan ran a good race, and that he has bequeathed us with a world better than the one he inherited. And in his honor, we now have the obligation to carry on with all the many tasks that he undertook. We must soldier on in order to fulfill his desire for a better Africa, a more just, peaceful, and equitable world. We must fight against human trafficking, which has become a modern form of slavery. We must ensure that our young people get the necessary education and skills, and we must ensure that we fight and achieve a non-sexist world. And I'd like to say to our brother, Kofi, may your soul rest in peace, in eternal peace, as you join the galaxy of our heroes and heroines. And I'm sure they are all waiting for you to join them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Dlamini Zuma, and as you put it, his family was the entire world. Our last speaker is the vote of thanks, and that will be given by the country representative of UN Women, Ms. Anne Gituku Shongwe, who's been delegated by the resident coordinator to deliver the vote of thanks.
Good afternoon. Many of you are given 10 minutes, I was given 1. So, on behalf of the UN Resident Coordinator, who, as you heard, is short but not concise and concentrated, and as dynamic as that describes. So, on behalf of our Resident Coordinator, Dr. Nados Bekele-Thomas, and the entire UN country team. And I don't know if maybe you should just stand and wave so that they know who you are, because we have many, many heads of the UN who have been participating in preparing this, who have been standing in honor at the United Nations Library, where a condolence book was opened earlier this week, and took turns during the week under the leadership of our then acting resident coordinator for a couple of days, Jules Dish, who's the head of UNODC. So just wanted to acknowledge our other colleagues here. But I first want to really so excited to have seen how Dr. Phumzile was so excited to see you standing here so tall in your new way, in your new life. So we thank you. Ambassador Welly Lenhlapo, we follow you closely on Facebook because you're always sharing with the world what is going on in this world of multilateralism. You're a true multilateralist, and we really love you for that. So thank you. We see you, and thank you for taking the time to be here. Our High Commissioner, thank you so much for gracing us with your time, for serenading us as well with your colleague who came and played a recorder, a flute. Sometimes we see them, those plastic ones, and we think that they come from the Western world, but in actual fact, we noticed how beautiful that flute was that he spoke from. But thank you for those words, and appreciate that you took the time and really accept our condolences for your uncle's passing. You know, it is personal for the rest of us. It may not be as close, it's not a relative, but we truly loved him, each and every one of us. So thank you. Sorry, Judge Nabi Pillay, thank you so much for really sharing those wonderful stories, including at the dinner table, and for making the time, for flying over to be here with us. We really appreciate you, and thank you. And we hope we can keep bothering you because you're here. So as the UN family, we hope that we can continually call you whenever we need you to be with us. Honorable Trevor Manuel, thank you again for coming and being here. We appreciate you, and appreciate your presence. The UN Choir. For really coming and, you know, warming up the room. I also want to really recognize and thank the team that pulled this together with very little time under the UN Resident Coordinator's Office. Thank you so much for pulling this together. And for each and every one of you who took the time out to come and actually be with us at a time when it's difficult. We know it is short notice and we didn't have a lot of time to prepare you, but just want to thank you for that. UNISA, Professor Makanya, your team, we now have direct phone numbers for Hermina and for all the different people that we need to call. We need a room. We even know which rooms. We tell them which room we want because we now, this is home. But you know, everyone takes the opportunity to say something. So I'll say something really small before I say my final vote of thanks. But you know, I looked at all his quotes and there were so many incredible ones, but I thought to leave you with this one. To live is to choose, Kofi Annan says. But to choose well, you must know who you are and what you say.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for an inspiring and reflective morning. Thank you to all our speakers. May Kofi Annan rest in power and in peace. Please join us for refreshments outside. Thank you.
You can hand over my handbag if you need to run. We'll talk on the phone.
Okay, you're going to start on me and then I'll turn to her. Yeah. Yeah, more Clive. Yeah. I know. That's fine.
Can you move back and run? You want to ask them to Ivan Bingo? Oh, it's okay.
That's fine.
Okay.
It's a nice background noise, yeah. Indeed, a very good afternoon from UNISA, where we have just heard absolutely wonderful tributes to the former UN Secretary General, His Excellency Kofi Annan, from his second home, South Africa. And one of those tributes came from the Executive Director of UN Women, who is also, as we were told today, a child of South Africa. Let's start with how you remember him.
Well, I didn't have a privilege of working with him, but I also worked in the background in the areas where he was interested in. He was a fighter for poverty, he was a fighter for women, he was a bridge builder, and I just admired his humility and his ability to transcend very complex issues and managing to bring different views together. In the United Nations, he headed one of the most difficult portfolio at a difficult time. He was as the Under-Secretary General for peacekeeping, when we had seen many blows for UN peacekeepers. He was able to pull it together, to reinforce its capacity, and to help the United Nations and the nations of the world to use this very important resource more effectively. And when he became Secretary General, we will remember him for the Millennium Development Goals, which placed poverty right at the center of the work of the United Nations even stronger. But also, he was the Secretary General that reached out very strongly to civil society, to private sector, to a variety of stakeholders to make sure that they worked together with the member states and to make the United Nations their home. And of course, a very approachable person and one of the best sons of Africa that we shared with the world.
Now, you have taken over a portfolio at the United Nations that he was very passionate about women. And of course, when you look at what happens now, looking at the work that he did with peacekeeping, one of the tributes that we had today was that he would say that some of the countries would set him up to fail, because although his work was to ensure that there was peace and these countries would come to him, but behind the scenes they were actually going and arming some of the warring groups. And yet, at the end of the day, women would be affected the most.
And one of the important lesson we take from his life in relation to fighting for peace was the emphasis that he also put on the role that women should play as peacemakers, as people who must be involved in ending conflicts. And even though UN Women was born after his time, he was one of the pathfinders who made sure that the place for women in the United Nations, in its work for peace, was also prominent. Whenever he traveled around the world, he spoke about women. He went out of his way to look at how women in different parts of the world were living, and was able to bring those insights into the work of the United Nations as the Secretary General.
Now, in this month of African women, what are some of the challenges that still remain? Where are some of the challenges that still remain, particularly in terms of conflict?
Over the world is one of the unfinished business that Kofi Annan would like us to pay attention to. The fact that homes are not safe for women, the fact that public places are not safe for women and children requires us to really up our game and to address this scourge that continues to face the world with greater determination. I'm very proud of the women of South Africa. I'm very proud of the women that led Total Shutdown, because they actually showed that women of South Africa want to find solution. They want to lead from the front, but women must not do this work alone. Everybody has a role to play in making sure that we have a much more peaceful world. Peace must start at the home where the women lives. Peace must be in the schools where our girls and boys go. Peace must be at the workplace where men and women work. Women must not feel that the workplace is a place where they are demeaned, where they are harassed. It must be a place where they are treated with dignity and they are seen as equal role players.
And finally, before you came here, you stopped over in Somalia and Tanzania. Can you give us a sense of why it was that you went there?
Well, firstly, just congratulate the Somalians for the big steps that they have taken to create a state that has the institutions of government that working from a country that at some point was ruled by warlords. Even though we still have the challenge of Al-Shabaab, but we actually have a state that works for its people, and they're preparing for the next elections in 2020, where for the first time they will have a proper one person, one vote election, and they will try to cover the whole country. It was wonderful to meet a young South African woman there who is in the police, UN police, who came from SABC, ended up with the UN police, and has worked so hard living outside South Africa that she actually is studying for her PhD on counter-terrorism. So proud of her. Then in Tanzania, a country that has achieved so much, that has reduced its dependency on foreign aid in its national budget from 60% to 6%. There also we're seeing a lot of progress, and we do want to encourage Ghana to continue to make sure that we keep the girls at school, because this is one of the most important challenge that Ghana faces, because like many other African countries, it has the problem of teenage pregnancy, and part of our work there as UN Women is to support them to contain this challenge, which we also have in South Africa, and to make sure that we do not lose girls on the account of early and unwanted pregnancies.
Thank you very much. Dr. Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka, the Executive Director of UN Women, she participated and gave her own version of how she will remember Kofi Annan and the impact that he had on her life for her to end up where she is today. Back to you in studio.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you so much.